Good morning to you. For those of you whom I have not met, my name is Tom Lindell. I've lived in Tucson since 1970. I was a professor of molecular and cellular biology at the University of Arizona for 36 years and retired in 2006. In my retirement, I have begun doing printmaking. I'm an etcher, and I'm having fun at it. It's like having a lab again. So I want to talk to you this morning about a subject called Whatever Happened to Ethics. I'm frequently transported back to my childhood home in Bayport, Minnesota. Population 2,500. 1,000 of whom were in the Minnesota State Prison. They had to count them somewhere. I realized much later in my life that small communities have an ethic unique to them. In retrospect, it was an idyllic place to grow up. We could go anywhere on our bikes, and we had the run of the town, from the cemetery across the street from our house where I learned to drive to the public swimming beach on the St. Croix River. We learned life's lessons largely by experiencing things firsthand and without a lot of supervision, learning responsibility through minor successes, but more importantly, through our own failures. It was a growth experience that I am thankful for, as we could be free to do many things that our parents never knew about to their dying day. They were never pranks intended to harm others, but we managed to leave our mark around town in various ways. A derelict, eyesore outhouse tipped over in the middle of the night, a few streetlights missing bulbs, etc. Growing up in a small town can be a privilege, but also a curse, depending upon how you view the experience. You can imagine that it is difficult not to be noticed in that setting. If little Tommy was up to something that he should not be doing, his mother would certainly hear about it by somebody telling her about it. People looked out for each other. It was a verification of the mantra, "It takes a village to raise a child." I learned something from that experience. I learned that my life was not my own, that others were looking over my shoulder at all times. It was hard not to be good, as others would certainly know me for what I did. While I feel good about my experiences, I have no doubt that some ran away from this small town life purposely wanting to put that kind of scrutiny behind them. Others perhaps saw it for what it was, a shaping experience that did not induce paranoia, but left one with an indelible sense of responsibility. The responsibility of which I speak is one where everyone was constantly under observation, and once recognized, it was just a matter of getting used to it. I call this developing a life of transparency. Learning to live a life that is open to outside examination is learning to become authentic. And authenticity involves living out a genuine lifestyle, one that is not hidden from view, but open to anyone who might observe that life from a distance. However, before I proceed, I should define the terms that I employ in my title. Ethics is the study of the general nature of morals and specific moral choices an individual makes in relation to others. The key word here is the word others. Ethics involves a concern for the other as we each personally interact with the world around us. In teaching bioethics, I use a simplistic approach to ethics that is called the four principles approach. That is a way to analyze ethical situations using four considerations that we casually refer to as the four yardsticks. The reason that we struggle with ethics is that ethical dilemmas are not black and white. Situations that demand an ethical inquiry are always gray and need to be chewed upon to be resolved. We therefore use these four principles to assist us in analyzing ethical dilemmas. The four principles are beneficence, which is very simply to do good. The second one is non-maleficence, which is to do no harm. The third is autonomy, respecting an individual's right to self-determination. And the last one is justice, treat equals as equals. In using these principles, we examine each of these yardsticks individually. We ask, for example, whether any good has resulted from the scenario, that is, beneficence. Likewise, we ask whether any harm has resulted, and that, again, is non-maleficence. We ask also whether an individual's autonomy has been infringed upon, and whether any inequality or injustice has been abridged, or justice has been abridged. In the end, we mentally sum up the relative gravity of the situation to decide how to proceed. This is far from a quantitative approach. It is, in fact, very qualitative. Analysis of ethical issues can, of course, be far more complex. However, this simple four principles approach allows us the opportunity to begin. As an observation about society today, I have often wondered whether we in our Western culture have paid undue deference to autonomy, more than beneficence, non-maleficence, or justice. It seems like we are becoming more and more rugged individualists in protecting ourselves at the expense of the rest of the community, or the government for that matter. The result is that community suffers when we elevate self-interest over the rest of humanity. The current growing economic divide between rich and poor is an example of the right of individuals to accrue massive personal wealth with disregard to the well-being of the other. Authenticity is a condition or quality of being authentic, trustworthy, or genuine. What I hope to relate to you today is how I believe ethics and authenticity go hand in hand. We have chosen to do the work we are currently doing, or did, for a living, and my hope is that despite the daily challenges in life, that you enjoy the work that you have done. It is indeed a luxury to wake up in the morning and look forward to whatever the day has to offer. Our very human problem, however, is that our expectations often get in the way. We often expect that things will go a certain way and are challenged and disappointed when they don't. Is this because we have been taught from an early age, if we plan and organize properly, things will go orderly and smoothly? All of the fairy tales, myths, and stories have happy endings. Why don't ours? Many of our religions are in place to offer comfort and hopefulness in an ambiguous world. But is this realistic? What is missing in this picture? As children, many grow up thinking there will be a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or expect to be rewarded for doing good. But does this worldview match up with the reality that many of us experience on a daily basis? What do we do when the world does not match up with our hopes and expectations, or the expectations of those with whom we interact on a daily basis? How do we tell our friends and family that life might not get any better? Can we engage people honestly, viewing the world realistically, without walking on eggshells out of fear that we will hurt their feelings? Unfortunately, many do not want to acknowledge reality. Do we? Would viewing life situations through the lens of authenticity help? I suspect it would. We live in a world today that is characterized by a quick fix mentality that does not easily lend itself to ethical decision making. Many think that there are answers for everything, where it is just a matter of finding the right recipe or guru to fix the problem. I offer some examples of ethical issues that abound in society today, and I will give you an indication of which of these four yardsticks appear to be affected or involved. A lack of concern for the other in obtaining suitable health care. I have my health care insurance. Why should I have to subsidize those who do not have it? This is a matter of justice. Standardized testing will solve all of the problems of unequal educational opportunity. Again, this is a matter of justice. The death penalty will act as a deterrent to capital crime. This is non-maleficence. Mandatory prison sentences put people away for predetermined periods of time, even though we do little or nothing to prepare them to re-enter society. Again, non-maleficence. 13-year-old young women are getting pregnant while we preach abstinence and prevent access to birth control. Non-maleficence, justice, and autonomy. Choosing life may offer a difficult loss of educational opportunity for young women, while the right to choose is being slowly eroded. Autonomy. Some think that the institution of traditional marriage must be constitutionally protected, even though half of these so-called traditional marriages in the U.S. will end in divorce. Justice. Homosexuality is not your problem. That is until your own child or grandchild tells you that he or she is gay. Justice and autonomy. We engage in hypocritical immigration policy where no one wins, and rabid demonstrations are occurring in the San Diego area over the temporary placement of women and children entering the U.S. Non-maleficence. Global warming is being denigrated because it interferes with economics that would be affected by reducing emissions of carbon dioxide. We have non-maleficence versus the right to autonomy to be able to pollute. There is more concern over the health and welfare of animals than humans. Non-maleficence. Uncivil comments are common in response to opinions expressed in the newspaper or especially on the internet. Non-maleficence versus the right to autonomy to say those things. Corporations are people, of course, and we have the right to contribute vast sums of money to politicians or political parties. Autonomy is affected, justice is affected, non-maleficence is involved. Private corporations have the right to refuse to pay for drugs affecting reproductive rights of women. Autonomy, justice, and non-maleficence. We claim to value education, but we pay our teachers poorly. Many burn out too early in their careers. Non-maleficence. And finally, according to some, there is only one form of salvation to the world's ills, a religion that is based on a God of power and might, and an authority that comes from an infallible book. All of this is just too simple, yet many believe that we have the answers to all of life's daunting questions. If only we would listen to our political and religious leaders and allow them to take us where they want us to go. We are being seduced, threatened, and expected to follow. We are definitely not being invited to think for ourselves or lead. We are instead led into becoming apathetic. Autonomy and non-maleficence. It is no wonder that given the complexities of life today, people have chosen to insulate themselves, to live in their own private bubble of what they believe the world is supposed to be or what they were told it should be. They expect answers, if not immediately, at least soon. As a result, everyone has a worldview that is a Weltanschauung, that is contrived to some extent. We do that to survive the starkness of reality because we were not all taught adequately to deal with the ambiguity of reality. Instead, we were taught fairy tales as children, but nobody explained to us as we grew older that the real world is not like that. Our religions also do that to us as well. They often speak of panaceas and the promise of what will happen at the end. They offer ultimate hope, but without teaching us how to cope with the next disaster that lurks around the corner. It sounds like I'm painting a rather bleak picture, but on the contrary, I'm simply inviting you into the reality of life as we have come to know and experience it. I guess you know by now that I'm a scientist by training. I taught bioethics and another course on science and theology. It was in that latter course that I was confronted with an observation that I did not anticipate. My naive assumption was that teaching a group of 20 to 22-year-olds, I might be dealing with a group of young people who were hungry for new and different points of view. You can probably read where I'm going with this. To my surprise, these young people had already significantly developed their Weltanschauung, or worldview. It is just as hard to dislodge them from that worldview as it is for the older person, whom we have stereotyped as rigid and intellectually unchanging. After thinking about this for a long while, I came to realize that my job as a teacher was not to change students as much as it was to invite them into the strange and threatening world of reality, which involves inviting them to ask questions and challenge their established mindsets. I could only hope that students might begin to see things differently and be open to new possibilities and change. My job, if you will, as a teacher, was to invite students into a world that welcomes questions. My hope was that, if not now, perhaps sometime in the future, they will begin to realize that it might be important to think about changing some established aspects of their worldview when they realize that their old paradigm no longer works. And this is especially true of religious belief. Why is change so difficult? Allow me to read a poem that I like. It's called Autobiography in 5 Short Chapters. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I am helpless. It is not my fault. It takes forever to find my way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in. I can't believe I'm in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. What has all of this to do with ethics and authenticity? Each and every one of us have supposedly developed a sense of right and wrong, and we have been taught how to react or respond to situations that challenge what we have learned along the way. How do we respond to situations when they are not what was expected? Oh, how easy it would be if only things were simple, that black and white answers would suffice for all of the unexpected or unintended incursions into our mindset. The study of ethics, however, is not simple because it deals with the gray areas in life, the things we were not taught, the ambiguous things that challenge us continually. And answers are not simple and forthcoming because there are no set answers. In order to think ethically, we have to ponder things, knowing that there are no easy or correct answers. Muddling through this contemplation of the gray areas, we ultimately come to some tentative conclusion as to how to proceed. However, knowing whether or not we have made the right decision. When we deal in the arena of ethical decision-making, we are dealing with ambiguity. Those very things we did not expect or anticipate. We simply have to learn to react without the reassurance that we made the correct response. We struggle to find a path through the minefield of life only with a blurry compass to provide us with direction. Will we ever be prepared for this? The professional ethicist is of no help here. He or she is often looking in from the sidelines, analyzing why we made one decision and not the other. They simply ask, why did you choose a certain course of action over the other? They are not here to tell us how to act. The moralist, on the other hand, wants us to think in terms of how we ought to act, and if we do not act in a certain way, warns us that there are consequences. Unfortunately, there is much trite moralizing today that is intended to place us either in or outside the fold. Ultimately, we come to the stark realization that when it comes to making difficult decisions, we are on our own. We can learn from other situations that might be similar, but none really matches the exact situation in which we are confronted. At the end of the day, it is up to each and every one of us to take the talents we have, accepting the consequences of our own actions. We are forced to react, but how will we do so? What motivates us to choose the role of one who cares and consequently be open to the insecurity of having to react independently? What are the underlying basic principles that motivate us to act at all? In these situations, I believe we must realize that ethics begins with each and every one of us. When confronted by different situations, it is about making decisions on our own, often based on what we have experienced in our lifetimes. Ethical decision-making is also about acknowledging that each of us can make a difference in the world. Each of us is an agent of action. As responsible humans, we have no one else to blame for the consequences of our action. The buck stops here. While we often work in teams and have the luxury of joint decision-making, there are times when we must make decisions independently. You can stop and ruminate about these difficult decisions or situations if you wish, but often there is no time to do anything but to react as best we can under the circumstances and on our own. It is an empowering situation that we did not choose. In the end, it is about doing the right thing when no one is watching. We can only do that with any sense of authenticity if we have openly and transparently dealt with things as they happen, and not how they were supposed to happen. I'm convinced that the world would be a different place if each and every one of us saw ourselves as a role model. There is an awesome realization that life, when we begin to recognize, there is an awesome realization in life when we begin to realize, whether we like it or not, that we are role models for others. Parents, teachers, athletes, and professionals have no choice in the matter. They are instant role models. Recognizing that one is a role model can be a real wake-up call. Acknowledging that we are, in fact, role models is a real growth experience that many do not want to assume. Ultimately, as we begin to accept that we are indeed responsible, we begin to assume our real role in life, one that presumably we have freely elected rather than accepted by default. The individual who has accommodated to life and accepted that he or she is an agent of authenticity and change begins to deal with a new reality. We no longer look to others for complete direction or guidance. We develop confidence that we can act with transparency and responsibility, and we are, in fact, in control. The reality that I dealt with when I was working with your children or grandchildren who were attending the University of Arizona, presumably on their way towards becoming responsible and hopefully authentic people. However, what I discovered was that I was dealing with a group of young people who were frequently paralyzed by fear. More specifically, fear of failure. I encountered many young people, most of whom were extremely talented, but who did not have adequate coping skills to permit them to deal with their own failures. Many were devastated by relatively simple setbacks, a poor grade on an exam, or a broken relationship. Is this because we parents of this generation did all in our power to keep our children from failing? We did this because we thought it was our job to do that. We have picked up the pieces after our children and in the process denied them the wonderful luxury of making mistakes. I have always liked the quote, which I believe is attributed to scientist and peace activist Linus Pauling. It goes like this: "The privilege of making a mistake within reason is a precious thing." I actually encountered some students who were approaching their early 20s who had not failed at anything, which was amazing when you think about it. What they do not realize is that most of us have been significantly shaped through life experiences that include negative experiences as well. Unfortunately, many of these young people had not experienced the reality that everyone does not always win. Some have to lose. The other observation that I have of this cohort of young people is that few of them had done any interior work. For example, they came to me for advice on how to write a personal statement for medical or some other professional school, oftentimes with a draft in hand. I read it politely and would frequently hand it back to them and tell them as gently as I can that this does not quite cut it, or describe who even I knew who they were. Some, interestingly, did not even know the difference between criticism and constructive criticism, and were unable to deal with what I was trying to tell them. Then we would play a game. I would sit back with a notepad and I would say, "Tell me, what do you do well?" Oh, and they hated this game. They painfully pulled out some characteristics describing who they were, and it wasn't easy. Almost to a person, they did not like this exercise because it required that they talk about themselves. They were uncomfortable doing this because they perceived this to be boasting. And this is the irony. It was incumbent upon them to describe who they are to get to that next step, yet they do so painfully and with some considerable difficulty. Their struggle is that they do not want to stand out relative to their peers, but what they do not realize is that they are not speaking to their peers in writing a personal statement. In addition, I had to strongly caution them not to give their personal statements to their peers, or their family for that matter, to read. First of all, they do not want to stand out in comparison to their peers, and then they wouldn't write it the way they should, knowing that their friends will read it. But second, their peers will not be critical of them when they need it the most. At the end of this exercise, I would take this list of things that they told me about what they did well. Oh, by the way, it would come usually to a halt, and I would draw a dotted line across, and I'd say, "Okay, tell me what your best friend would tell me what you do well." So I'd maybe get 2 or 3 more. So I would hand the list back to them, and I would say to them, "Is this what you wrote about in your personal statement?" No. And my response to them was, "Why not? This is what you have to sell." It's an amazing experience. What I discovered was that my job was to invite these young people to have a license to live an authentic life that will begin to face up to the challenges they will face in the world, knowing that they will have to learn to deal with things they did not anticipate or expect. It is hard work to get young people at that age to openly deal with reality in the absence of real-world experiences. This is why I used to recommend to pre-medical students that they do hospice work, volunteer at hospice. It is here that they realize that traditional medicine no longer is effective, and care becomes a matter of dealing with very human end-of-life issues, oftentimes just simply being present. You may wonder how I, as a scientist, have developed a way of thinking and acting in a world that I have come to recognize as ambiguous. Believe it or not, it comes from my understanding of science, and in particular cosmology and biological evolution. The message of science with regard to beginnings is a stark one, and one that many people are in denial about. Current theories about the beginning of the universe suggest that it was probably a quantum phenomenon for which outcomes are totally unpredictable, only a statistical probability. Therefore, it is not possible to predict an outcome. Our solar system developed 9 billion years after the Big Bang and was not intended. It just happened. However, we can be assured of one thing. You and I are related to everything in the universe because we all came from that initial point in space-time. This perspective reveals that we share an interconnectedness to everything in the universe. Likewise, life on Earth was also not intended. It just happened. Many refuse to believe that we humans were the product or are the product of serendipity. However, again, the beautiful realization is that you and I are intimately related to everything that has ever lived long enough to reproduce. This reveals an interrelationship to all life on Earth, because we all came from an initial life form that somehow lived long enough to survive, to reproduce. I like to use this quote from a very famous scientific journal. I don't even know if it's published anymore. It's called U.S. News and World Report. This process, evolution, may be rapid, but it's not elegant. Instead of inventing new features from scratch, evolution works with what it has, and that's called contingency. Modifying existing structures by trial and error. The result is a messy legacy of complicated biochemical pathways and body parts that are more serviceable than sleekly designed. Although proponents of intelligent design hold that organisms are too perfect to have arisen by chance, science shows that organisms don't work perfectly at all. They just work. The basic issue in my estimation is that some people are totally unwilling to admit to the possibility that a higher power is not in control. Yet this is the message of cosmology and biological evolution. God did nothing to initiate the universe nor to privilege life, or that we humans were intended for that matter. And of course, evolution continues, despite our tinkering with it quite a bit. We have all heard from friends and family who present numerous problems and are unable to cope with the simple challenges in life, and have asked the question, why did God do this to me? If you have asked or heard this classical question, you are not alone. But in asking this question theologically, you have already conceded that God is in absolute control of everything. And when something goes wrong, do we not ask why we, or those for whom we care, are being singled out for punishment? This image of God is unfortunately pervasive. It is the God that some love and others hate. In the end, it is a concession that this God is pulling